I've often thought of writing a story about a man who is some sort of guru seeker and potential yogi, who goes one day into an automat and sits down at a table where there is another fellow, and he sort of thinks that this man looks wise, and he projects onto him the idea that he is a guru. And he says, "I feel there's something special about it." And the man says, "Oh, really?" Really, actually, there's nothing special about me. I happen to be an insurance salesman." And this other fellow says, "Isn't that fascinating how modest he is?" And then I want to develop this story step by step. They keep meeting each other because they both eat at the same automat regularly for lunch. And although the fellow really is an insurance salesman and doesn't know a thing about these things, it in the end results in the enlightenment of the person who projected this image upon him. And so finally we come to the last consideration, which is the question: in what way and by what means can an individual who is under the impression that he is a separate individual, limited by and enclosed in his bag of skin, how can such a person effectively realize that he is deep down the universal self, the Brahman? This, of course, is a curious question. I started out yesterday to discuss what the self means in Hindu philosophy. The principle Tat Tvam Asi, that art thou, meaning that the self is the basis of all being. And being is not something into which we come, but out of which we proceed. In popular language, we say, "I came into this world," as if you came from somewhere else altogether, from outside. But you don't. You come out of this world, just in the same way as the leaves come from the tree. So in that way you are an expression of it, and the self meaning itself, self meaning identity, self meaning basis, ground, is what everybody fundamentally is. Then I went on to discuss the world as the self in the sense of the cosmos as the self. The world is manifested, great cycles and then again withdrawn, in which, according to Hindu philosophy and mythology. And now I want to go on to discuss the human world as the self. Well, now, there have in the known history of mankind been about 3 types of culture. We'll call them hunting cultures, agrarian cultures, and industrial cultures. The hunting culture seems to have been the earliest. And agrarian cultures arose when hunters learned to farm and therefore had to settle in certain places. And it was then that men built cities. And when we pass from the hunting to the agrarian culture, we notice 2 very important changes occur. In the hunting culture, every man is expert in the whole culture. That's because he spends a good deal of time alone in the forests or on the hills. And so he has to know how to make clothes, how to cook, how to build, how to fight, ride, and all those things. But as soon as people become settled in cities, we get a division of labor, because it's obviously more practical when you're all living together for some people to specialize in some things and some in others. The other important difference is the difference of religion between the hunting culture and the agrarian culture. The religious man of the hunting culture is generally known as a shaman, S-A-H-A-M-A-N. And a shaman is a kind of weird individual, and I mean weird in the ancient sense of the word, not queer, but weird in the sense of magic, because he is a person of a peculiar type of sensitivity who finds initiation into the shaman role by going off by himself for a long time into the depths of the forests or the heights of the mountains. And in that isolation, he comes in touch with a domain of consciousness which is known by all sorts of names: the spirit world, the ancestors, the gods, or whatever. And his knowledge of that world is supposed to give him a peculiar powers of healing, of prophecy, of magic in general. The thing that you must note, though, about a shaman is that his initiation is found by himself. He does not receive initiation from an order or a guru. On the other hand, the religious man of the agrarian community is a priest. And a priest is almost invariably an ordained person. He receives his power from a community of priests or from a guru. In other words, from tradition. Tradition is all important in the agrarian community. Now then, reasonably enough, the first communities are stockaded enclosures. They are made of palings. And so we speak of people being within the pale and beyond the pale. And so finally we come to the last consideration, which is the question, in what way and by what means can an individual who is under the impression that he is a separate individual, limited by and enclosed in his bag of skin, how can such a person effectively realize that he is deep down the universal self? This, of course, is a curious question. It proposes a journey to the place where you already are. Now, it's true that you may not know that you are there, but you are. And if you take a journey to the place where you are, you will visit many other places than the place where you are. When you find through some long experience that all the places you go to are not the place you wanted to find, it may occur to you that you were already there in the beginning. And that is the Dharma, or method, as I translated that word, which all gurus, teachers of spiritual development, use fundamentally. They are all of them tricksters, but in the most beneficent sense of the word trickster.
You know how people are when they get spiritually proud. They belong to some kind of a church group or an occult group and say, we are the ones who have, of course, the right teaching. We're the in-group, we are the elect, and everybody else outside is really off the track. But then comes along someone who one-ups them by saying, well, in our circles we're very tolerant, and we accept all religions and all ways as leading to the one. But what they're doing is they're playing the game called, we are more tolerant than you are. You see, and in this way, the egocentric being is always in his own trap. So Buddha saw that all his yoga exercises and ascetic disciplines had just been ways of trying to get himself out of the trap in order to save his own skin, in order to find peace for himself. And he realized that that is an impossible thing to do because the motivation ruins the project. He found out then, you see, that there was no trap to get out of except himself. Trap and trapped are one. And when you understand that, there isn't any trap left. I'm going to explain that, of course, more carefully. So, as a result of this experience, he formulated what he calls the Dharma, we come then to the final parts of the Eightfold Path. There are two concluding steps, which are called, well, I explain the word Samadhi, but I'll write it here again, Smriti, Samyak Smriti, and Samyak Samadhi. Smriti means recollection, memory, present-mindedness. Seems rather funny that the same word can mean recollection or memory and present-mindedness. But Smriti is exactly what that wonderful old rascal Gurdjieff meant by self-awareness or self-remembering. Smriti is to have a complete presence of mind. So there is a wonderful meditation called the House That Jack Built meditation. At least that's what I call it. That the Southern Buddhists practice. He walks and he says to himself, there is a lifting of the foot. There is a lifting of the foot. Next thing he says, there is a perception of the lifting of the foot. And next he says, there is a tendency towards the perception of the feeling of the lifting of the foot. And finally he says, there is a consciousness of the tendency of the perception of the feeling. And so, with everything that he does, he knows that he does it. He is self-aware. This is tricky. Of course, it's not easy to do. But as you practice this, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. But you will find that there are so many things to be aware of at any given moment in what you're doing that at best you only ever pick out one or two of them. That's the first thing you'll find out. Ordinary conscious awareness is seeing the world with blinkers on. As we say, you can think only of one thing at a time. That's because ordinary consciousness is narrowed consciousness. That's being narrow-minded in the true sense of the word. Looking at things that way. Then you find out that, as in the course of going around, being aware of what you're doing all the time, what are you doing when you remember? Or when you think about the future? I'm aware that I'm remembering. I'm aware that I'm thinking about the future. But you see, what eventually happens is you discover that there isn't any way of being absent-minded. All thoughts are in the present and of the present. And when you discover that, you approach Samadhi. Samadhi is the complete state, the fulfilled state of mind. And you will find many, many different ideas among the sects of Buddhists and Hindus as to what Samadhi is. Some people call it a trance. Some people call it a state of consciousness without anything in it, knowing with no object of knowledge. Some people say that it is the unification of the knower and the known. All these are varying opinions. I had a friend who was a Zen master, and he used to talk about Samadhi. And he said a very fine example of Samadhi is a fine horse rider. When you watch a good cowboy, he is one being with the horse. Here is the point. If you believe, if you have certain propositions that you want to assert about the ultimate reality, or what Paul Tillich calls the ultimate ground of being, you're talking nonsense. Because you can't say something specific about everything. You see, supposing you wanted to say God has a shape. But if God is all that there is, then God doesn't have any outside, so he can't have a shape. You have to have an outside and space outside it to have a shape.